Welcome back to Carolina Journal Radio. I'm Mitch Kokai. Race and gender pandering corrupt the university and undermine our culture. That's the stark assessment in the subtitle of a book with the full title, The Diversity Delusion, and its author joins us now. Heather McDonald is Thomas W. Smith Fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on, Mitch. I appreciate it.
So why tackle this topic, the impact of this goal of diversity and social justice on university campuses?
Because it's transforming our world for the worse, I believe. And because I believe very strongly in the value, the preciousness of our Western inheritance. And that is now under lethal assault on college campuses. Students are being taught not just to hate the great works of Western civilization, but to hate America, to hate each other, to see oppression where none exists. And so I wrote this book really out of sorrow and rage. Sorrow that the things that I love and so many people should value are being subjected to a completely illegitimate attack, claiming that works like Shakespeare or Milton or Mark Twain are somehow purveyors of lethal bigotry and sexism, a ridiculous idea, but also just anger that universities, which should be the place where students learn to get down on their knees in gratitude before our civilization, are instead now more and more devoted to teaching students to think of themselves as victims and oppressed. A preposterous conceit, but they bring that delusion with them into the world at large, and they are transforming it very rapidly.
Someone out there is going to be listening and saying, it can't be that bad. This has to be hyperbole.
Yeah.
Is it really that bad?
No, it's really that bad. I travel, I speak at a lot of college campuses. Not only am I subjected to the hysterical student mob that feels that any challenge to their claim to be oppressed must come out of bigotry. But I ask students what their favorite courses are, what their majors are, and it's a very depressing roster. Nobody's studying the humanities anymore, and if they are, it's the most shallow of courses, comic books, Cuban comic books or Hispanic comic books or media studies. A school has to work very hard to avoid the penetration of the diversity ideology into its core curriculum, into its faculty. Right now, the left has the bit on its teeth and is spreading this idea that the West in general and America in particular are the sources of all of the world's oppression throughout English courses, throughout anthropology, throughout social sciences, throughout sociology, throughout political science. If you don't think it's bad, it means you're not paying attention. And I wish I had that naivete and innocence left. But I can tell you every single day, if you're following these things, every single day brings news of a new enormity that is happening somewhere to our traditions, to our culture, to the things that, again, should be precious to all of us.
We are chatting with Heather McDonald, a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and author of the book that describes this situation titled The Diversity Delusion. Colleges have always been liberal, left of center. When did it start to happen that we got this situation where the basic tenets of Western civilization and America itself get attacked?
I think it began in the 1980s. That's when you had the rise of multiculturalism and of identity politics. I'm very grateful that I was in college in the 1970s, and although I got sucked into a very nonsensical and counterfactual set of ideas in literary theory known as deconstruction, which I'm not going to get into because it's just too bizarre. Nobody would believe it if I described it. But at least in the 1970s, we still read the great books without anybody thinking to gripe that they were written by white males. So I got to lose myself in the beauty of Chaucer, Edmund Spenser, John Milton, Alexander Pope, William Wordsworth. I wrote my senior thesis on Wordsworth. It never occurred to me to think that, well, I'm not reading female writers, so, my identity is not being mirrored back to me. No, I read the greatest works of literature. Being female is not an accomplishment. It is not particularly interesting. But what happened in the 1980s, for a variety of reasons that are complex and somewhat mysterious, you had the rise of identity politics. Most infamously, the protests led by Jesse Jackson at Stanford University against Stanford's very modest, undemanding freshman core curriculum that made some minimal effort to expose students systematically to the dramatic sweep of Western civilization. But it read the classics, and sorry, folks, get over it. The greatest thinkers in Western civilization, with exceptions, of course, have been white males. Who cares? But this was the start of the period where females and minority students claimed that to read white males was oppressive to their identity. So Jesse Jackson led the famous chant, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go." This was a play on words because Western Civ was the shorthand for this course. But frankly, it was quite, it adumbrated what was coming because, in fact, that mentality that sees oppression in beauty and greatness would spread, and indeed all of Western civilization would come under attack.
You mentioned naivete about this situation. Mm-hmm. For folks who get beyond that stage because they read The Diversity Delusion or start to pay attention, what do you hope happens next?
Well, I certainly hope that alumni stop giving money to their alma maters. I can guarantee you, unless you've done a heck of a lot of due diligence and you are confident that your English department is not filled with theory-based courses on post-colonialism and intersectional gender studies and white privilege, if you have not confirmed for a fact that it is not doing those things, the chances are very high that it is. And the school that you remember does not exist any longer unless you're very young, in which case you may be a product of the diversity-obsessed academy. But do not give money to your school unless you know that it is still committed unapologetically and joyfully to passing on our inheritance. What I would hope is that parents... Actually, at this point, I think we're going to have to start homeschooling in college. And I'm somebody who aspired to be an academic. I wanted to go to school all my life. I aspired to teach in comparative literature. I think there is no greater good, no higher life than being an academic and curating these works. At this point, though, I think we're going to need a homeschooling movement for college because it is such a grotesque waste of money. You have these metastasizing diversity bureaucracies, a consumer culture where very little is being asked of students, and they are not being exposed systematically to the great works. I wasn't either. In the 70s, there was no effort. By then, the faculty had long abdicated its responsibility, so nobody said to me, you should take history. I was at a university that had one of the strongest history departments in the country. I didn't take any history courses because I was too ignorant, and the faculty were not going to do anything to lift my ignorance. So I got out of Yale University without studying history, which is an abomination. So parents should know that if they want their kids to be rigorously exposed, they need to have very hands-on, or again, I think we're going to have some alternative institutions being created.
Well, if you want to learn much more about this topic, you can consult the book. It is titled The Diversity Delusion, Race and Gender Pandering Corrupt the University and Undermine Our Culture. Its author has been our guest, Heather McDonald, Thomas W. Smith Fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mitch.
We'll have more on Carolina Journal Radio in just a moment.